Well, hello, friends and fellow pioneers. Today, I have the pleasure of having with us Dale Strickler, the author of many books. One of them, which we're going to go in depth today because it's such a hot topic, the drought, right? And so, Dale authored a book called The Drought Resistant Farm, and he's going to share with us his experience. And Dale, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love for you
Thank
to
you.
start by telling us, how did you get into this work that seems to be really one of the most important things for humanity right now?
Well, I grew up on a farm in southeastern Kansas, and it seemed like every spring we'd start the growing season with hope and optimism, and our crops would look great, and our pastures would look great. And by July and August, the rain would stop and our crops would burn up, our pastures would burn up. We'd we'd be in a desperate situation by fall. And it seemed like it happened almost every year. And it was really depressing and obviously economically challenging as well. And so those memories really formed a very deep impression in me. And when I went away to college, one of my goals was to learn how to avoid that situation. How what can we do and to to stop the impact of drought? Now, I I kind of put some of those goals away when I left college, took a full time job, and was teaching at a small college. And but in the year 2012, we had a severe drought over most of the United States, and uh, I'd been promoting a number of practices and no-till and cover cropping and things like that, and but we really didn't see that big of a difference until the year of 2012. And year 2012, um, one of the driest year in history. In my area, we happened to catch a very nice rain, about a 3-inch rain towards the end of June. Essentially, the only rain we got that summer, but it was very welcome. But side by side, there were fields of corn that on the one side of the fence, the corn yielded nothing. And on the other side of the fence, the corn produced normal yields, like 160 bushel corn. And same thing with soybeans. There'd be soybeans yielding 25, the identical variety of soybeans planted the exact same day on two sides of a fence. One made 25 bushel, the other made 52 bushel. That's a huge difference. And it all came down to management of soil. So I started really focusing on, you know, if we can do 52 bushel soybeans, we can do 160 bushel corn in 2012, the driest year in history, on essentially one good rain for the whole summer. Why can't we do that every year? How can we make ourselves drought resilient? So I really started digging into this, trying to learn as much as I can. I found out that I thought, well, I'm going to read some books on this, and I found there aren't any. You would think that in a country that where the entire social fabric of our country was just completely devastated by the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, that there would be some sort of information on managing for drought resilience, and there really wasn't any. Oh my gosh, what a huge gaping hole there is in our toolbox. We really don't have good tools for, and the more I dug into it, the more I found out that most of our practices leave us more vulnerable to drought, not less. And so I started compiling information, and then uh, I got enough, said, I have enough here for a book. And so I contacted a bunch of publishers, and finally found one that would accept it. And I guess the rest, they say, like they say, is history. Went on to write a couple other books, and one of the really interesting things about the book is how many doors, you know I guess people buy books to educate themselves. I wrote a book to educate myself because during the research for the book, and also the the opportunities that it has afforded me to travel and and see other places, speak in other places. Um, I've been able to go and do things where I have taken home way more information than what I left behind in those places. It really has been a wonderful journey, and it's really beneficial to exchange information with people. I hope I've given some people some good ideas on managing for drought, and and hope to do so more so in the future. So, um,
So that is amazing. And I love how you said that you wrote the book to get educated. And as we've heard so many times, that the best way to teach, the best way to learn is really to teach others. And I actually just had these arrive that I wanted to show everyone, hot off the mailbox. So these are the books that Dale was just talking about, that he wrote. So there's that one, Storing Your Soil, and Managing Pasture right here. So Dale's going to share some highlights with us from his journey of writing this series of books, and also all of your experience with your work and your farm.
okay.
Now, I wanted to ask you, like, that is personally how you got into this work, because of how you kind of grew up and all of that. What did you see yourself doing, as you were growing up? Is this the work that you envision yourself doing?
Oh, no, not at all. I growing up on the farm, I saw farming as mindless drudgery that I wanted to escape from. I I did not see myself as being a farmer at all. I took a what is it, a career aptitude test, I think they call it, where it's like, let's examine your personality and what kind of job are you best suited for, and it said um, farmer or college professor. And so that's stupid. I don't want to do either of those. Well, guess what? That's my my first job out of college was as a college instructor, and my and not long after I bought a farm and became a farmer. But no, I originally wanted to go in the military and become a career military person, and they refused to take me because of my allergies. So I kind of had to scramble and find something else. And I kind of ended up in agriculture by accident. I was going to be a high school science teacher, and I just took agriculture classes because I found them interesting. And by the time I became a senior, I found out I was one class away from having an agronomy degree and two classes away from having an animal science degree. I just loaded up with agriculture classes because I found them interesting, but I never considered it as a profession until I was ready to leave college, and I was given an opportunity to have graduate school paid for through a research assistantship, and so that led to graduate school, and so that continued the journey, I guess. But it's been fun. It's been fascinating, and I become more and more fascinated by agriculture and its impact on our planet every single day.
Well, that's actually so beautiful that you're kind of, in retrospect, your fascination had kind of earned you a degree already. So
Yeah. So, do you want to go ahead and get into some of the
yeah,
principles
so
and
let's
so
go
forth?
ahead and share the screen.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay. Okay. So, I so um, I usually begin with the steps to create a. I start with soil management, and we can kind of play around with the time and see how things go here. But um, historically, we have thought that the only response that we had for drought was prayer. Let's pray for rain. And I will I'll revisit that praying for rain a couple times here throughout the session. I have some thoughts on praying for rain that I'll share with you. But is prayer the only thing we can do? Um, but can we actually do something to affect drought? Well, this is a field that was actually um, the Topeka Capital Journal, which is one of the bigger newspapers in Kansas. Took a picture of this field and had it on their front page a few years ago, talking about how severe the drought was in in Kansas, and um, everybody like, oh, those poor farmers. It's like they just can't catch a break. It just won't rain there. And the funny thing, maybe not so funny, the odd thing was that this was the field adjacent to that previous photo. So did this farmer get more rain than the other one? Exact same rain, exact same soil type. They both on the soils map, they're the exact same map. Did this guy get more rain? Obviously, this person's management is different than the one in the previous photo. What is this guy doing? So um, it's very common, and I do have a full time job as a cover crop seed salesman, um, and so I deal with a lot of farmers as customers, and every single farmer I talk to has to spend the first 5 to 10 minutes of the conversation telling me how dry it is where they are. And I'm going to show you where it's really dry. This is Al Beta, Saudi Arabia, 2.5 inches of annual rainfall and 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. That's really dry. If you had to farm, if you had no choice, you ask a million farmers what you can do in that area. What would you do if you farmed in that area? 999,999 would say move. But what if that's not an option? What can you do if you are dealt with this? And I'm not going to tell you right away, but I will move on to the principles of what you do in that area. So the job number one, if you're going to create a drought resilient soil, the very first thing, step number one, you have to get your rainfall into the soil. If you don't do that, then there's not much point in anything else. You have to get rain into the soil. And rain that does not enter the soil actually causes two problems. One is it predisposes you to drought. And the other thing is that this runoff ends up in places you don't want it. This is an aerial view of Topeka, Kansas in 1951, the entire city underwater. And floods are the most expensive natural disaster year in, year out. Floods cause huge problems, and a lot of people don't realize droughts and floods are two symptoms of the same problem. It's lack of water infiltration into the soil. You have to get water into the soil if you're going to prevent either droughts or floods. And when was the last, prior to this one big rain you got, when was the previous rain in Texas? I mean, months ago, wasn't it? I mean, we were horribly dry in all over the southern Great Plains, and we get one big rain, and then we've got floods everywhere. So droughts and floods are two symptoms of the same problem, and that is that we have a broken water cycle. And I want to show you this picture. This picture I took, this was in western Kansas. They average about 12 inches of rainfall here in this location. And this perfectly illustrates a broken water cycle. You say, what's wrong with this picture? Look over here. There's water standing over here. And this is a flat field. There's just a bare slope on this. So they had a little over an inch of rain 10 days previously. Where did the water in this puddle come from? It obviously came from the surrounding slopes. An inch of rain, and they had water running off. And it hadn't rained for months prior to that rain. This was the first rain they'd had in a long time. This rain fell on dry soil, and it didn't go in. It ran off. So over here, it has accumulated in a big puddle. Over here in this area, it is too wet to plant. Over here, there was new planted wheat. You see, they tilled that up and planted it. And this wheat is growing it's planted in soil that's powder dry and needs another rain in order to sprout. So just a few feet apart in this same field, it's too wet to plant and too dry to sprout. And oh yeah, as I was going down the road, this is the backside of that field. There's a dust storm blowing. I had to turn my headlights on going down the road so that oncoming vehicles would know where I am. So you couldn't see the road. The dust was blowing so bad. Why is there such a dysfunctional water cycle? And people think, oh, that's just a problem in, the dry areas. Well, here's a terrace inlet, to allow to drain water out of terraces. Why do we need these things? Well, it's because why is water ponding in the terrace channels? Because it's not running in to the soil where it falls. It's ridiculous that we ever have a need for these things. It's a symptom that we have not done in agriculture by and large. We have not done a good job of promoting infiltration. In fact, what we've done is just the opposite. And I want to take you this and pick up on the discussion of praying for rain. I think it's wrong to pray for rain. And it's not because I don't believe in the power of prayer. I do. But if this is your field, you know, if you have teenagers and teenager comes up to you, can I have $1,000? And say, okay. What's it for? And you say, oh, stuff. Okay. And a week later, they say, can I have another $1,000? Well, I just gave you $1,000. Well, yeah, but I really need more because that first 1,000 is gone. Okay. And then the next week, I need another $1,000. And you say, wait a minute. What are you doing with all this money? No one needs this much money at your age. What are you doing with it? You're wasting it, aren't you? So if you could, I'm not going to pretend that I know the will of God. No, not even going there. But if God had the same human frailties that I do, and the owner of this field, whoever's managing this field in this picture, starts praying for rain, I would say, I just gave you an inch 10 days ago and you wasted it. Why should I give you any more? This is not a method of farming this is not being a steward of land. This is not glorifying creation. This is wasting. This is waste and squandering the gifts we are given. I don't see why people do not see this. And the main problem that we've had is we have had an agriculture based largely on tillage. And you can see as on this screen, as the intensity of tillage increases, the infiltration rate in millimeters per minute goes way down as you have more and more tillage. That's not what I was taught as a kid. I was taught the reason we tilled soil, why I had to sit on that tractor and drive around in circles for 16 hours a day, was because, well, you stir the ground, the water goes in better. That's not how it works. It's actually the opposite. Stirring the soil does not promote infiltration. It reduces it. The way you do improve infiltration is by having a good mulch on the soil. And I'm going to revisit this field, the one that made the front page of the paper for drought, and you can see it's suffering, obviously. But if you look at the soil, it's completely bare. The problem with this field is that in 2011, 2012, the owner of this field, or the operator of this field, discovered that he could make a small fortune baling up corn stalks, baling up all his residue and selling them off of rented land. So he would outbid everybody for cash rent, take over property, and then pay for his cash rent plus a couple $100 an acre by selling off all the crop residue. And after a few years of doing that, removing all the residue from his fields, his organic matter content went down and he started having crop failures year after year. And like I said, this adjacent farmer, identical rainfall. This was right next to each other, same soil type. Crop looks beautiful. It's perfect. And here's another example. This is soybeans that were planted in 2012. This was planted double crop after wheat, and obviously not a single rain after planting, and these soybeans are dying. Here are some soybeans nearby. You say, boy, this person must have caught a rain. Well, actually, these soybeans are in the same field. The difference is where the yellow arrow is, this line right here between the red and the yellow arrow is where the swather broke down. They were baling up the wheat straw. And where the swather broke down and they couldn't, mow down any more wheat straw in order to bale it up, look at the difference. And the soybeans over here, where the red arrow didn't make a crop at all. But over here, where the yellow arrow is, where the wheat straw was left intact, they were able to hold the moisture and have a good crop. And so having a mulch on the soil, and if you don't have enough mulch from previous crop residue, you can grow mulch. And that's where cover cropping comes in. You can grow additional mulch. I'll point you to this graph over here at the right. This is the cumulative water infiltration that's soaked into the soil. 15 centimeters is about 6 inches. Over here, 6 centimeters is about, a little over 2 inches. And you look at this. This was flat soil without a cover crop, wheat stubble without a cover crop, about 2 inches in 3 hours of time soaked into the soil. But over here with a cover crop, this is 6 inches in 3 hours. How often do you ever get a rainfall greater than 6 inches in 3 hours? And this soil was able to absorb it all with that cover crop. This is a picture. One of my customers sent this to me. To the left, and this was a big rainfall and hailstorm. And to the left was actually a crop that got hailed out. But over to the left, long-term history of no-till and cover crops. And look at that. All the water soaked in the ground. To the right, conventional tillage, no cover crops, no mulch. Where's the water going here? It's going right down the ditch. Yeah, all the water running off this field going right down the ditch. And so you can either get water in the soil or you can allow it to run off. And once it runs off, you've lost that resource. You've squandered it. And then, what do we do with the water that does eventually run off? Just about every farm, every ranch has these little dry streams that run right right after rain occurs. And one thing you can do with that is dam it up. Now, the problem with doing this, well, first of all, what is this mimicking? When you have all these little small streams, they have a dam every so often in it to slow that passage of water to the ocean so it actually soaks in, replenishes aquifers. All we're doing there is essentially mimicking what beavers did for centuries for free. The problem with doing that, with humans doing that, is that in most states in the western U.S., this is actually illegal. You cannot impound water and prevent the downward flow of water. It is illegal. And I think we really need to look at changing some of those archaic laws. They're very counterproductive. This is why we have aquifers running dry, is because we have gotten rid of beaver and we have not taken action to replace what beaver used to do, which is slow that waterfall down and allow it to sink in and replenish aquifers. Beaver were responsible for the Ogallala Aquifer and most of our other underground aquifers. They had a very big role in creating those aquifers, and we have not allowed those streams to do what they should be doing, which is refilling our aquifers. Instead, we've just pumped them dry. Now, I told you what I would tell you what they did in Saudi Arabia, and so here's what we're doing here. what they did is they dammed up these little dry streams. You can see the little dam here going across the stream where this man is walking. They had two problems. Actually, their biggest problem here on 2.5 inches annual rainfall was flooding. They when it rained, the water would run off these rocks so severely and would go down these little dry streams. The only place their sheep had to graze was along these dry streams. The only place there was any grass, and it would just carry them away and drown them. And so they had very high livestock losses from flooding when they'd get their one rain a year. So the idea was, let's put that rain to use. So you can see all these little dams across the stream. And then from those dams, they made these little wings out here on the contour. See that this whole line here is the same elevation. So as water goes down this stream, it is diverted out onto what would be considered upland. Now this over here is the same elevation as this, but it's obviously higher elevation than over here. So this is a way of moving water out from the streams out onto the uplands where it can soak in and do this. So this was, I actually have these two. This is 1 year after the construction of the terraces. Look what's happening right next to those terraces. This is in the spring of 2019, so 8 years later. Look at that grass. It's amazing what capturing a little moisture can do. And this is 8 years later in the fall. Look at that grass. All this accomplished simply by stopping runoff. Simply by stopping runoff. So when everybody's standing around after a rain that breaks a long drought, and everybody says, oh, how much rain did you get? And then the answer should be all of it. So you want to increase soil organic matter. If you want, after you get soil or water in the soil, you want to hang on to it. And so one of the most important things you can do there is to increase your soil organic matter. And again, why is our soil organic matter so low? 300 years ago, soil organic matter on this continent was very high. It's not high anymore. It's 1/3 to 1/2 of what it was 300 years ago. And the reason is, again, because of tillage. Tillage reduces soil organic matter, and tillage reduces water holding capacity. Our management has made things worse, not better. And how do you restore that? How do we restore soil organic matter? Soil organic matter is made by growing plants. The more plant growth you can churn through a soil, and not the tops. It's not the tops that produce soil organic matter. It's actually sugary substances that leak out of the roots and feed soil microbes that build soil organic matter. And that's one misconception we've had. We thought that you had to plow all this cover crop under to get organic matter into the soil. And that's actually not the case. This is sun hemp. This was the cover crop in this soil, or in this trial here. You can see that when they used sun hemp cover crop, they got more soil organic matter. And it's not, sun hemp is a nice cover crop, but it's not the choice of cover crop that's so important. It's that you cover crop. Anytime, sunlight is a gift from God. If you allow sunlight to strike bare soil, you are wasting a gift from God. And if you put that to work, good things happen. Use that sunlight. Use that sunlight to feed the earth, feed the soil. And the sun hemp, it's not the same as this hemp. Okay, it's completely different plant. Sun hemp is a legume, but again, the thing that cover crops do, not only do they create that mulch for water infiltration, but what this little film sequence is, this is the root exudates coming out of a root tip. This is the sugary liquid that feeds soil microbes that make soil organic matter. And if you really, really want to build soil organic matter and create a very drought resilient system, you focus on perennials. This is essentially intermediate wheatgrass that was been hybridized with wheat. And over here to the right is wheat. Look at the difference in the root system between an annual and a perennial of two very closely related species. If we want to really restore organic matter to our soils, we'd plant them back to pasture and build that soil organic matter. Nothing builds organic matter like pastured perennials. Now, that's probably not realistic. We're probably never, ever going back to that system. But one important consideration in this day and age is that soil organic matter is essentially soil carbon. And that carbon comes from the atmosphere. If we want to reverse climate change that is occurring from excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, if that is indeed the case, that is the cause of climate change, then the best way to do that is to suck that carbon out of the air and put it in the soil in the form of soil organic matter. There's no downside to that process. It is all positive. Everything about it. It stops floods. It holds what stops droughts, makes food more nutritious. Everything about putting carbon in the soil is beneficial. There's no downside. There's no reason not to. Whether you believe in climate change or not, putting carbon in the soil is something we need to be doing. Another way of making sure that water stays in the soil is to, again, have a mulch. Surface mulch slows evaporation. One study done in southwest Kansas, they compared the water loss, the evaporation from bare soil versus residue covered soil, and it was 5 inches a year less where they had a mulch compared to bare soil. And then trapping snow is important. This is some residue. You can just barely see it. I apologize for the poor picture quality. I didn't realize what I had, but this is a wheat field with a bunch of snowfall. This wheat was drilled into a cover crop, no-tilled into a cover crop. In the background is also a wheat field without any snow on it. You can see right up at the very top of the screen, the wheat field across the fence. No snow whatsoever. And in a drought year, that water recharge from that little bit of snow can make a huge, huge difference. And of course, what a mulch does is it stops evaporation. Now, look at what's going on here. This is the field boundary here. This landowner to the right, no-till cover crops. You can see a cover crop growing here. And to the left, look at all the moisture. This is no cover crop. Look at the moisture leaving that field through evaporation. And so cover cropping can help slow evaporation as well. Why is that? Well, take a look at this. Here's the air temperature on a hot day. And this is the soil temperature on that same day on a bare soil. Essentially, it's 20 degrees hotter than the air temperature. And this is the temperature on a residue covered field. 20 degrees cooler. So I want to ask you, if there are 450 million acres of cropland. in the United States. There are 4 billion acres of cropland around the world. What happens to global temperatures when 80% of those acres, 70 or 80% of those acres are this bare? And when they are this dry, it's the soil from that field. So what can you do about that? Well, let me show you. Now, this is the soil from that previous field. So this is the soil from that field where that weed is planted. And, oh gosh, they could sure use a rain. Well, this is the field right across the road. This was just across the road to the west. So this field was no-tilled, was not cover cropped, but they left all the wheat stubble intact from the previous crop, did not till it under. And this is the soil from that field. So there's moisture here. This can grow something. You could not grow anything in the previous field. Leaving all that mulch intact keeps moisture in the soil. And another thing that leaves your soil, besides moisture with tillage, is carbon dioxide. This is organic matter leaving your soil. Okay, no-till had 52. Look at that. Look at how much carbon leaves your soil with tillage. This is a single operation. 700 and some pounds of CO2 leaving the soil after one tillage operation. Now, what we want to do in our soil is we want to rebuild macropores and aggregates so that water and air can get down. And this is important. We talked about water getting into the soil, but it's also critical for oxygen to get into the soil. If you don't have oxygen in the soil, roots don't grow. So to get roots down into the soil, you need to create holes so that oxygen can get in. This hole was created by a dung beetle. And how do you get dung beetles on your soil? Well, you feed them. You feed them manure. Grazing animals can bring in dung beetles that can create these tunnels, and earthworms that can create tunnels. How do you get more earthworms? Again, you feed them. What do earthworms eat? They like things that are high in protein and high in calcium, like legume residue. And if you do a good job of feeding worms, you can get some really nice worms. This is an actual species of earthworm from Australia, by the way. And you can use roots to dig holes in the soil. This is a radish plant planted in August, and this was dug up in November. You can poke some holes in the ground with that. So expanding your root system can allow you to extract. Once you get water in the soil by increasing infiltration, and once you've stored it in the soil with organic matter and mulch and kept it there, next job is putting roots down, deep roots and efficient roots to dig it out. So getting holes in the ground, like using these radishes, can enhance that process. Another real help is mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi is a fungus that lives on plant roots. The yellow structure here, right here, that is a plant root, and this white filament here is the mycorrhizal fungi. It lives partially inside this plant, and it goes out into the soil up to 2 feet past the root system and brings water and nutrients back to that plant. And it can make a monster difference. You see to the right here, that oat plant had no mycorrhizal fungi. The one to the left did. Look at the difference in soil structure there. And the root ball. That is the mycorrhizal fungi binding that soil. And this is what it does for drought tolerance. To the left over here, here's corn inoculated with mycorrhizal fungi. To the right is not. and research. This is from Wisconsin. Corn inoculated with a mycorrhizal inoculant, 30% longer. Okay, what they did here is they inoculated half the plants with mycorrhizal fungi, and they completely withheld water and counted the days until they died. And the mycorrhizal colonized plants lasted longer. You can see here out in the field, same thing. So it is really possible to build a drought resilient soil. I'll show you, a little bit here. This is a pit that I dug in one of my fields personally. I dug a trench to put in a water line, and I looked at that and I said, I have no roots below 18 inches. And this subsoil down here is just solid gray. So this little white arrow marks the farthest down I could find a root, and this gray Play-Doh looking soil. The top 6 inches was 1.9% organic matter and no roots below 18 inches. So what I did is I put this to perennial grassland, used daily move rotational grazing. I inoculated with mycorrhizal fungi. And so everything that grew basically got turned into manure, put back on the soil. This is 15 years later. 8.7% organic matter and roots going 7 foot plus in this soil. You can create a drought resilient soil. It's not pie in the sky. There's actual legitimate science and practical experience, both, that demonstrate to us how we can change our soil. So when we say, pray for rain, don't just pray for rain. If you're praying for rain, you're praying for the wrong thing. Pray for wisdom. Pray for wisdom that you can use the rain you're giving more wisely. How to make better use of the gifts that you're already given instead of constantly asking for more. God is not Santa Claus. We don't get what we ask for, we get what we deserve. And maybe we should be making ourselves more deserving of the gift of rain by being a better steward of the land. I think that's where I probably ought to stop and let you come back on, and we'll take a break there, and in full length presentation, like where I have unlimited time. At this point, I would go into some things like how to provide emergency feed for livestock in a drought, which is huge issue. And then how do we change our agricultural systems overall? And then finally, which I think is an absolute fascinating topic, everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Well, maybe we have been doing something about the weather, only it hasn't been the right thing. I think we do affect the weather, and I think we affect the weather greatly. We just haven't known that. And I think we've mostly affected weather to the negative. There is an increasing body of evidence that we have the capability to decrease our temperatures and to increase our rainfall if enough people in an area manage their land correctly. And there are some scientists who are documenting that actually all over the world. Spain, Czech Republic, and the United States and Mexico, who are documenting those very things. So very, very exciting. Maybe one day we can just eliminate drought, but it's going to take a lot of effort.
Well, thank you, Dale, so much. And as you're ending on, praying and praying for rain and the thought of stewardship and kind of praying for rain being like praying that there's no consequences to our actions, right? I love a quote that we're going to get into in a minute, some announcements about some upcoming an upcoming free webinar that you're hosting. But in that
Mhm.
description, it's you're quoted as saying, "Through our farming practices, we can create our own droughts, or we can create abundance. We set the stage for our future by how we treat our soil today." And I think really there's just a true, I don't really know if to call it a pandemic or crisis of stewardship, of people not stewarding the earth, their bodies, their finances, their time, their attention. And then we have all these really huge kind of snowball problems. And it's a matter really of stewardship and understanding of our responsibility. Now, there's something else that I found when I was reading your biography and your information about your book that really inspired me. So you said, um, you mentioned it, but I just really wanted to talk about it here. Instead of praying for rain, we should be praying for the knowledge, wisdom, and that what's necessary to create farms and ranches that can withstand drought. And then you said that it frustrated you when people pray for rain during a drought, um, and the thought that as God, as our heavenly Father, listening to our prayers and seeing how we've squandered it, it's like, we have this resource that we've been given, and there is some rain everywhere, and the fact that there's like a bottomless like a hole, nobody wants to fix the hole, it's like this
Mhm.
ship with obviously a ship with a hole, the water's coming in, but the concept of this problem, this leak. And like you said, it's like, well, the supplier needs to supply more, and as managers, we're not looking at what we can do to stop the leak. And the honestly, I've looked at your slides probably 4 or 5 times where you share the percentages, and it's still hard for my mind to really capture. I just feel like I need to keep watching it over and over because it's astounding how drastic, how different it is, to have like we believe in no till and we believe in covering, but just to see the numbers, I mean, that is it's the photos and the numbers and the statistics are mind-blowing. And I'm glad that you don't talk faster than you do, because it just uh, it really is, it's hard to assimilate the reality and the truth of how much we're wasting with
Mhm.
our stewardship or lack thereof. And so, I just wanted to say that I wanted to share that. I also wanted to share something else that you are quoted on your website, saying that common farming methods have decreased infiltration of rainfall, reduced the root depth of our crops, and reduced the water holding capacity of our soils. I believe we should not be praying for rain. I'm not opposed to prayer itself, far from it. I believe in the power of prayer, but we're praying for the wrong thing, as you mentioned. And you talk about the Drought Resilient Farm, and I really love, and I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit easier for me to share with people. But I really love how attainable, experiential that the book is laid out with ideas on how to. I hope we do get to talk a little bit about how to, let's see, in page 79, we get into the water supply. And I love just some of the practical, very doable suggestions that you make here of how you can collect rainwater right, and you talk about what you need where you need it, and just in some of the
Thank you.
presentations that I've heard you speak, you talk about how people are want to build the soil, but I mean we've experienced this ourselves. Sometimes we have to drive an hour to get one implement and one other thing, and it's not sustainable to not grow it here. And even though it's been our goal to regenerate this soil, like you had to kind of learn this whole new language because you weren't taught this way. It's hard. It's very difficult. It's time prohibitive, cost prohibitive, labor prohibitive to really bring in all the things that are needed. The best answer, the best economy, the best ecosystem is to grow those cover crops yourself, to grow your own hay. And really after 10 years, that's really where I'm at. Harvest your own water and grow your own cover, hay, straw, whatever it is. If you can harvest your water and grow your own cover, really nothing's impossible in my opinion with what we've experienced. And I really appreciate what you've shared.
Well,
Now let
look
me
what
ask
they
you
did in
something.
Saudi Arabia on
What's that?
look what they did in Saudi Arabia just by stopping runoff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean it really, if they can do that there and make grass that looks that good on no more soil, no more rainfall than they have, why can we not do that in Texas or Kansas or Colorado or anywhere in the United States?
Absolutely. And we really are so wealthy. And like you were talking about, people only look at the rainfall they're not getting. But what about, looking at how much you are getting? If you are getting 17, 22, 20 inches of rain a year, that is fabulous compared to some areas that get less. I wanted to ask you, yeah, I've really, really enjoyed looking through your book, The Drought Resilient Farm. What is your favorite part of how this project came out? Maybe how it was laid out, or what you were able to highlight that you hope or is the most inspiring thing that people can walk away from having this book?
Well, in 2012, which was the year that really inspired me to write the book, I went to a number of livestock meetings. It's like um, what drought management meetings that put on by various government agencies, and every one of them essentially had the same format. They'd be about a 3 hour meeting or 2 hour meeting, and the first half hour to an hour would be defining what a drought was. Really, you need to tell us that? Hasn't rained here for 3 months. We know what a drought is. And then the second part was telling us how dry it was, which we were already fully aware of. How dry we were compared to history, how dry we were compared to other places, and showing us a drought map is like. And then they'd finally get down to what do you do about it, and they said, oh well, wean early and sell half your cow herd. That's it. That's all you have for us. Really, you want us to cut our this year's income dramatically by weaning our calves early and selling them to a feedlot, and you want us to sell half our cow herd, so we're going to reduce and sell them on a drought market when no one has anything to feed them, they're next to worthless. And then when it starts raining again, we buy them back at an inflated price. That doesn't sound like a financially sound set of decisions to me, and that's the entirety of the advice that governmental agencies were giving us in 2012. I'm like, there's got to be more than this. And so one of the chapters in there is how do you find emergency livestock feed in a drought? And I really didn't get into that in this. I mean, we could have talked for hours on end here, and but I think the biggest, most of that book is about preparation for the next drought. you can't build soil organic and say, oh, we're in a drought, let's build soil organic matter. Let's do that tomorrow. So that, or let's do that today so we have more water holding capacity tomorrow. It's not going to work. You can't do that. I mean, these are long-term preparations, but the most people decide to take action in a drought after the drought's occurred, and your options are rather limited at that point. But there are things you can do to find emergency feed in a drought. And in that book, there's a number of things that we talked about, uh, real world examples, real practical things, lessons that my grandpa taught me from the Dust Bowl, things I learned myself on my own, ranchers from the Southwest United States that have lived long enough, people from Africa, a lot of lessons from all over the world um, went into that book. How can you find feed when hay's $300 a ton plus trucking and your animals are completely out of anything to eat? And what are the actions you take to preserve the health of your pasture and to maintain your animal performance by finding emergency feed? And that's something that I really have never seen a good source of information for anywhere else. And so I'm particularly proud of that chapter.
It is really beautiful, and I really like how practical it feels. It really feels like like we can take the book and actually apply it. It doesn't feel like a college textbook, let's say, or
Well, thank you.
yeah. And so I did. You mentioned growing all year long. And you talked about sun hemp, which is one of my favorite plants, to favorite cover crops to grow. Are there? So you talked about perennials. What did you say? Did you already mention what your favorite perennial crop is for having activity all
my
year long?
my favorite perennial is eastern gamma grass.
Would that
Uh,
work in places like Texas?
yes, actually, it works better there than where I am, but the varieties change. There are some varieties of eastern gamma grass that were developed like at San Marcos, Texas, called San Marcos, um, basically for Texas conditions, and it is a truly amazing grass. The root system is phenomenal. And it just saddens me that there are so few acres planted in Texas. To me, most of southeast Texas ought to be planted in eastern gamma grass. It
Yeah.
annoys me to see all this Bermuda grass planted. And like, why are you growing that stuff? You can grow gamma grass. It's so much more, it's equally as productive and so much more nutritious and so much better for wildlife, so much more drought tolerant. There's just, uh, and instead people are tilling soil and raising corn and cotton. And like, why would you do that when you can grow gamma grass? It's so pretty, just such a beautiful grass, and does so many wonderful things for the soil and phenomenal for wildlife. And I just, one of my favorite things in the world to do is just walk through a stand of eastern gamma grass, just shoulder high grass,
Hmm.
and listen to all the birds rustle in front of me, and it's just a wonderful, and it's really compatible with a lot of legumes and forbs and native wildflowers. I had a lot of wildflowers planted in my gamma grass, and it's just a really special place to me.
That's beautiful. I remember seeing the photo of you standing, actually, one of the slides, if you standing in your description of how you helped your roots depth to increase. You're
Mhm.
standing there in that field. Now, would you grow, um, if someone had to grow two I know the ideal is to grow perennials, but are there situations where you grow like two crops to kind of have that continuous cycle? Do you see that
Yes.
some places?
Yeah. And a lot of times soils are just too degraded. Of course, the outlet for perennials, perennial grasses is livestock. You can't. I guess you could sell hay, but selling hay is also pretty destructive to soil
Hmm.
because you're a lot of your organic matter input, your potential to create manure leaves the farm when you sell hay rather than graze with livestock. But a lot of soils are just too degraded to get a good perennial stand of pasture going. And a good way to build those soils up to where they can sustain a perennial is to grow a couple crops of annual cover crops that are grazed. And
Hmm.
you create that surface organic matter layer by mixing manure and crop residue and letting it rot down. You create that little spongy surface layer that holds moisture to get those little small seeds of perennial grasses going.
So, what would you say? Do you have some kind of go-to suggestions for what a starter one would be for one of those situations? Um, is there
For,
a suggestion like
for
that?
annuals,
Hmm.
okay, during the winter, rye or triticale is almost always a base. Oats are really beneficial. It depends a lot on where you are in the country.
Right, right.
In Texas, you've got a lot more options than I have in Kansas because
Hmm.
of the milder winters. Uh, there are things we just cannot grow here because our winters are too severe on average. But you've got some options like you can grow Hubam clover over the winter, works great in Lake Texas blacklands. But Hubam is
Finally, some good news for that black lands. Let me tell you, we
yeah,
bought this field that used to be, um, corn and excuse me, cotton. I don't even know why I said corn, but we planted corn recently, so I was thinking about that. But so it's been very difficult to rebuild this soil after all the decades of abuse, and even though it sat um, without anything happening to it, the time didn't really do as much as we would like to
yeah,
think.
yeah.
It needs a lot of loving.
Yeah, Texas blacklands. They're they have so much potential, but it's so hard to get there.
Yeah.
Uh, you got that high shrink swell clay that uh, you do not want to let it dry out. It is so important to have a mulch. And that can hold an insane amount of water once it's soaked
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
But once it dries out, it just cracks so bad the roots get torn up. And there are some in that book, there are some things like I've seen some research done decades ago on things like vertical mulches done in Texas blackland clay uh, that you kind of pre-designate where the cracks are going to occur in the soil
Mm.
by digging little trenches and backfilling with organic material. Um, and that was discarded because this is too expensive. You can't do that, on a widespread scale. And then I go to a USDA research center up in Arkansas, and they've taken a no-till drill and put on oversized seed tubes. I replaced the seed tubes with big seed tubes. You could drop a carrot down the seed tube. It's about 2 inches wide and about 6 inches long. And then they hooked up a manure spreader moving
Wow.
backwards towards the front, grinds up manure and drops it in those slots on a grain drill on 10-inch centers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the machine that fixes blackland clay. And no one has commercially produced that machine. And like, when they did that on the contour, of course, a lot of blackland clay is tabletop flat. There is no contour. It does slope somewhere. We just don't know which way it goes until it rains, and then. But
Right.
this is a machine that fixes blackland clay, and so there are things you can do. And the principles are, get the infiltration in when it rains, and keep it covered so it never gets dry enough to crack open. And but it's hard to get the initial. You got to get plant growth going to achieve those goals, and so that can be difficult initially. So winter crops like rye, annual ryegrass, those are probably my two top choices. I love brassicas like radishes, collards, rapeseed, um, and then winter legumes like hairy vetch is big, common vetch, winter peas. Then in the summertime, um, and there's power and diversity. So what's your top one? A mix. You cannot say who's your favorite football player. Oh, that's Peyton Manning or Tom Brady. You cannot compose a football team of 11 Tom Brady's and win it a single game ever. It'd be disastrous. Everybody plays a role because
Mhm.
not every, and the same way in a cover crop. Every plant plays a role, and there is no silver bullet plant. In the summertime, probably my top species though is that I start with is sorghum sedan grass, because so much of what I want in a cover crop is root exudates, and nothing produces root exudates better than sorghum sedan grass. And then I want nitrogen fixation, and sun hemp is probably the top plant for that. I
Mhm.
also like cowpeas because they vine, and buckwheat is useful because it frees up phosphorus reserves in the soil. Sunflower, sunflower is an amazing plant. Um, it We're finding out that uh, plants that are high in oil content, like sunflower, can nourish fungi in the soil, which help improve soil structure. It's um, Cover cropping is really a lot easier than if what we've been led to believe. It seems so complicated. Oh, what you feed soil microbes the same way you feed livestock, and for the same reason. A ruminant livestock have a rumen is a big fermentation chamber, and so is the soil.
Hmm.
And so you feed your soil protein, energy, vitamins, minerals, and you do that with plants. You feed ruminant livestock protein, vitamins, minerals, and you do that with plants. So if you feed them a balanced diet, a lot of diversity, heavy on the energy producing plants, which are
Mhm.
usually grasses, a little bit of fat and oil, a little bit of protein, and some plants that are able to extract minerals and free them up, like buckwheat or sunflower, um, then you'll be fine.
And
It's
I love that you're. Uh, I asked you about your favorite because I had seen that photo of you with the grass, but I love your answer about diversity because actually, it's interesting that I heard about you specifically through this upcoming series that we're going to share about in your
okay.
books.
Yeah.
And then I discovered that you were associated with green cover, which was something that we just learned in the last year about how important it is to have great diversity and strategic diversity in
Mhm.
cover crops. And if you don't mind, why don't you share with us? The reason I'm asking about this too is because of the pain that I'm seeing so many friends that have livestock and they're heartbroken with taking their they're not really excess stock, but they're having to get rid of so many of their animals because of this horrible drought and how expensive the hay is, how impractical it is to be bringing in hay, how their fields are so dry.
Mhm.
And so I believe the fast track to their resilience is to learn about these mixes of cover crops, and you happen to be associated and have been working with green cover for quite some time. So why don't you tell us about people are watching from all over, but
Mm-hmm.
we could have some examples with Texas. We ordered the warm soil builder or something like that
Mm-hmm.
for us, and if someone is having to go through right now, having sold so many of their livestock and their fields are dry, or they're about to have that defining moment where they may have to sell their livestock because it's so stressful to try to keep them alive.
Yeah.
What do these soil builder mixes have to offer for someone like that?
Well, obviously, the ability to grow some feed fairly rapidly. You can plant a mix, and within about 60 days, you have something you can graze. Um, and sometimes the challenge is, where now it takes moisture to grow that, but I know a good chunk of Texas had some moisture over the weekend or earlier in this week, and so we've got opportunity now um, to grow something in a lot of areas, and so look around at where's their bare soil, where's the soil bare, and I went San Antonio area in August here a year or two ago, and I was absolutely flabbergasted that people harvested corn in August, and there's there's nothing growing there. And this is under center pivots with unlimited water supply in many cases, and they're not growing anything. Like, and their pastures are just burned up. There's nothing to eat in the pastures, and cattle are starving. And sometimes they're hauling hay to the cattle on the pasture, which is a big no-no, by the way, if you read the book. Um, and right across the road, there's a center pivot with bare tilled ground growing nothing. And so, you know, in Texas, where a lot of the crops do get harvested fairly early in the fall, planted early, harvested early, there's a window to grow something for pasture. And if the next crop, you know, and that cover crop need not only be used for pasture, it can be used to help provide weed control. It can be used to fix some nitrogen. With nitrogen fertilizer costs the way it is, you could plant a mixture of legumes out there, make a little nitrogen, reduce next year's fertilizer bill. At the same time, you're providing feed for livestock. Um, if you've got Bermuda grass pastures that are, we're kind of getting towards the tail end of the grazing season on Bermuda grass or even native grass pastures, you can seed some annual crops into them. Um, I know it's common in some areas to broadcast ryegrass into Bermuda grass, but ryegrass really doesn't produce much in the fall. There are other plants that can produce a tremendous amount in the fall. Uh, Spring oats or spring peas will grow tremendously in the fall and make a lot of feed. And then there's some perennial plants that you can put into Bermuda grass that can make nitrogen year after year after year, and additional, make nitrogen for the Bermuda grass. Also make some feed themselves and make a higher quality pasture than monoculture Bermuda grass. And I know there are people that struggle with things like stem maggot in Bermuda grass, particularly Bermuda grass hayfields. There are ways to manage around that to where um, uh, Bermuda grass that has legumes growing in it is not nearly as susceptible to stem maggot as nitrogen fertilized Bermuda grass. There are some management methods that you can use to eliminate a lot of the problems we face are of our own creation. Things like armyworms, stem maggot. We create the conditions in which those pests thrive. And if we're creating the conditions, all we have to do is create conditions in which they don't thrive, create different conditions. So, anyhow, um, showing a lot of the Green Cover Seed website there. That is my employer. That is my full time job, and so we're in basically the business of selling products that heal soil, and almost every single problem we face uh, in agriculture can be fixed by better soil, and better soil is created through plants. And so the intelligent selection of plants to fix those problems um, makes life a lot easier. And I would much rather have a solution that comes in a bag of seed than a solution that comes in a jug and has a skull and crossbones and a warning label on it. So,
And we totally agree. And I really appreciate, like I said, I appreciate the work that you're personally doing. And when I found out you were also connected with Green Cover, I was really so excited to combine the conversation. But
yeah.
one of the things we had tried to do is do cover crops with just the single. I never even thought about combining, like having a recipe of different things. And I remember we contacted someone from your company, and I remember we had gotten a mix, but before it came in and before we opened it, I remember I had some of the seeds and I combined maybe, I don't know, 12 or 8 or 12 of the seeds from your ingredient list. And I had kind of test rows, and it was so wonderful to see in our soil, directly in our soil, where if I only planted sun hemp, or if I only planted cowpeas, or if I only planted, there was so much spacing, so many gaps. But then when I did the mix, it was just, there was something going on throughout. It was like music, it just, all the notes worked well. And this is really exciting for us, as we really hadn't thought about it yet, and this conversation brings it to our attention that it, like you said, a strategic mix of seeds and strategic seeds to put in the soil makes all the difference, really. It's not just a cover crop, but it's the cover crop that's going to help you get on the fast track to having a more resilient soil. I did have one question come in really quick, if we can address it. Someone said that their county was doing a ditching project across their property last week and unearthed uh, a lot of soil. They were wondering if you had any recommendations on what they could plant in the ditch that they dug out on their property to help water infiltration. And, is there something that can quickly help with that, since all that
Yeah.
soil is
Well,
exposed?
I think you want again, diversity. Have some grasses, some cereal rye, annual ryegrass, oats, and then some brassicas like radishes, and get some big tap roots in there, and then some legumes like hairy vetch, one of my favorites, common vetch. Um, think diversity. Uh,
Are there any of the mixes that would kind of cover that? Would a soil builder do that?
yeah, the Cool Season Soil Builder uh, really is a very simple way of, you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. That's something we kind of put together for that purpose, to build soil during the, and there's a number of the species that I just talked about in there. So
That's fabulous. And is that something that you do after the frost?
no, you could do it now. Um, we're getting to the point. Uh, cool season plants usually grow best. Um, grow best during um, when soil temperatures are start cooling down at night. And so, in the fall, uh, in the fall, um, the the temperatures start dropping, and they can thrive at night. It's when nighttime temperatures are really high in the summertime, and the days are long. That's when they really struggle. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And so I want to uh, leave people with the link to the event that I mentioned earlier. You're going to be doing a 3-part series. It's going to be quite in depth. That the National Center for Appropriate Technology is going to be hosting you coming up September 8th through the 22nd. And so I will have the link in the description to this video. Is there anything that you want to highlight that you're excited you'll be able to cover in this free webinar series that people can look forward to going in depth that you were not able to cover today?
yeah, I mean, we kind of hit upon the highlights of how you manage the soil itself, but we really didn't get into emergency feed for livestock. How do you create a drought resilient pasture, which is really kind of some of my favorite stuff. We kind of just hit the principles, but we really didn't get into the weeds, so to speak, of okay, what do you do when you're out of feed for your livestock? What can you do? And how do you prepare your pastures for the next drought? Livestock water supply, and how can we collectively manage our land to prevent droughts? How do we ensure that we have frequent gentle rain like we're supposed to, instead of 10 months without a rain and then we get 13 inches overnight? Because that seems to be the pattern we're in now. We have long droughts interrupted by frequent floods, and that's not desirable. And so when we get into what causes, and I'm not a climatologist, so but I do read, and I do pay attention to some of the research that people are doing on what triggers rainfall, what causes rainfall, uh, and surprisingly, a lot of the triggers of rainfall are biological in nature. It's not quite as simple as what we learned in grade school. So um, that's what's fascinating to me. So we just kind of scratched the surface here today, and I do need to be going. My assistant is reminding me of all the things that I have to do yet today.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us here to kind of to do that introduction. And everyone, just remember that Dale has published, have these 3 books published, and you can um, access them through his website that I have provided the link for in the description. And you can also buy them online through other retailers. Dale, in closing, what's been the hardest? I wanted to ask you 2 things real quick. In trying to help share these good news with people, that there's so much that they can do. What's been the hardest obstacle in either getting the information out there or getting people to really grasp um, the reality of their stewardship potential?
The human mind is an incredibly frustrating thing to deal with, because we think we make decisions based on logic, and we do not make decisions based on logic. We make decisions based on um, emotion, and I can lay out all kinds of evidence, all kinds of scientific data that indicate this should be your course of action, and people will leave the room, go out, hook up to the disc, and start tilling. I'm like, how?
That's devastating.
I could show them a rainfall simulator on how tillage completely destroys your rate of water infiltration and causes evaporation, and they'll go out and leave the meeting and go till. And it's like, did you learn nothing in this? And logic would say, I need to stop this practice now. And they don't. They ignore facts, they ignore logic, they ignore data. They make decisions based on emotion. And so, really, I mean, all the information in these books don't, they are tools for people who have already changed their mind.
Yeah.
I
And do
don't
you
know that
think
they actually change minds. And that's the biggest obstacle, is that you can lead someone to a book, but you can't force them to read, and you can't force them to change their mind.
that's the truth? I mean, I do tell people we're not here to really put something in you as mentors. We just draw out what's already there. And I really do appreciate
Yeah.
your resources and your time that you've shared with us. Do you think that people are just, as humans, we're just addicted kind of to comfort and convenience? And it just really takes quite a pattern interrupt to wake us up.
Well, if this most recent drought didn't do it, I'm not sure what will.
Yeah.
People have to become uncomfortable with where they're at before they make a change. And so I would think that people would be plenty uncomfortable right now. And part of the problem is that there are so many people that make so much money on the status quo of our current agricultural systems that it really is, you really do have to swim upstream sometimes, but upstream is where all the goodies are. So
Yeah.
it
Well, thank you so
keep
much. And Dale,
right.
as we close, if people
Thank
will
you.
only remember one thing, I mean, we went ahead and grabbed all three of the books, right? But if you could leave people with one, one wisdom that you've learned from your experience and in helping your family and so many people in your journey, what would that be as we close?
um, self-educate. Self-educate. There's never been, whether it's reading books, network, learn from other people. There's never been a time in history where learning has been so easy. YouTube, Google. Not that you want to believe everything you read on there, because you can get the exact opposite advice about any situation. And oh gosh, I get on some forums and I said, oh, I hope they don't do what that person advised them to do. That'd be disastrous. But you know, network, find like-minded people, and pick their brain. And some people learn by reading, some people like YouTube, some people like talking with other farmers, but um, do all three. Do all three. Buy books, create, attend conferences. And the best thing about conferences is not the person up on the stage, it's the person next to you a lot of times that you make connections with, that say, oh, you've done this. Well, I've been wanting to try it. Tell me what I should do, what I should not do. The connections you make in the hallway are so much more important than anybody you ever hear on stage. And that's why you know watching the recordings of the speakers on YouTube is not nearly as valuable as actually going to the conference itself, because you miss out on the hallway conversations, you miss out on the networking. And so, one thing I really like about the upcoming NCAT webinar is that um, we are trying to establish some networking. It's not just going to be me talking; that would be horrid. Um, we are trying to get everybody to connect with each other, and maybe exchange some information, exchange contact information, if they're so willing. If you're if you're willing to put yourself out there and get phone calls from people across the country, or maybe across the county. So, oh, I didn't know you were doing this, and you're 30 miles from me. Can I come over and see what you're doing, or that sort of thing? I think that's how we really are going to enact some change for the positive is by becoming a community where we work together and exchange information and realize that we're not in competition with each other. We're in cooperation with each other. And I think that's what's going to make a better world.
Well, thank you so much, Dale, and we'll let you go. And I just want to say thank you again, and we really, really appreciate all the wisdom you
Thank
shared
you.
from all your walks of life. I'd like to just close the broadcast with my blessing that I normally share with everyone. May the Lord bless you and keep you, shine his face toward you, be gracious unto you, turn his countenance toward you, and give you shalom peace. And like Dale said, if you haven't experienced enough pain that would want you to grow, we don't know what else will, but we bless you to really just take on the information that you've heard, all the wisdom that Dale shared, and put it in fertile soil so it can bear much fruit in your life. Thank you again, Dale. Everyone have a blessed day. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I will get you connected with Dale. Thanks again, Dale.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.